Welcome to the video. Triple Nipple Nick coming to you from Eternal Harvest Ecological Market Gardens. The topic of this video is going to be the things I wish I knew when I started farming. If you don't follow my farm at Eternal Harvest on Instagram, go do that. Go look at it, check it out. You can kind of get a visual guide for this video if you look at my posts. It's just going to be me talking here, but if you look at it, you can probably find a lot of what I'm talking about. So I'm going to be talking about the things I wish I knew when I started farming. And the best way to learn market gardening, other than reading books like The Market Gardener, The New Organic Grower, Jesse Frost's book, is to start doing it and to learn. Don't start too large. Start with a small scale. Make the stakes small so that you can mess up. And for me, I just jumped right into it, and that was great because I learned a lot. But there's a couple of things, three main things I'm going to talk about here today that I wish I had known, and I could have shortened the learning curve quite a bit, and I could have saved myself a lot of suffering if I had known these few key things before I started. Number one, weed prevention. You can't take care of weeds once you've already planted. Weeds are something in market gardening that you really need to have taken care of before you start planting. You need a pretty clean seed bed. My favorite way to do this is tarping with black silage tarps. Look at J.M. Fortier's work. You could tarp the area for a whole summer. Let's take my example. Let's describe that. I had a prairie. I got access to the land in the spring. It was all just like, let's get going. Just jumped right into it. And so I didn't have time to do any tarping or anything ahead of time. Had the land tilled, which I never would have done. Probably the only time I'll ever till, but I had a prairie and I needed to transform it into a garden instantly. So I just tilled it, and there's a bunch of grasses, a bunch of roots. My crops had no chance against the weeds. I lost probably like 80% of my crops the first year just to the weeds that completely took over, despite me spending hours and hours in the fields toiling. Whereas if you tarp if I had tarped that land for like a whole season, even half the season or something, then that wouldn't have been an issue. You can't really just jump into it. This is something you kind of want to start ahead of time. If you want to start on a really small scale, maybe you can start right away. Sheet mulching, there's a method that'll let you get going right away. Big investment, you don't want to do that on a bunch of land. So yeah, look into sheet mulching. You're basically going to lay down a bunch of compost, a bunch of mulch over the weeds, and you use a layer of cardboard so that the weeds can't get through, and by the time the cardboard's decomposed, the weeds have been smothered. You can also use chickens or any kind of animal to clear the land. You kind of have to leave the chickens on there for a while, though. I'd say my favorite method, if you are getting into market gardening and you want to not completely lose everything to the weeds the first year, is tarp it for a season with a silage tarp. Tarp the plot. Yeah, that was my biggest mistake by far, is I just didn't realize how crazy weeds were when you're working at a larger scale, and especially when you have like a former prairie. It's just pretty impossible to compete. You need to do something ahead of time for the weeds. Also, my first season, I didn't use enough compost. If you're starting with whatever kind of soil, whether you test it or not, if you don't test your soil and you want to just do everything you can to balance out whatever imbalances there are, use some compost. My second year, I put a solid inch of some beef manure that had been composted with hay, a solid inch on each of my rows, and that just did absolute wonders. And I had tarped it before then too, so I had less weeds, some good compost. Don't be afraid to invest in that. Start on a smaller scale and do it right. Use lots of compost, get rid of the weeds ahead of time, and then you're pretty much set. And the last of my three things, now I really just jumped right into it. I didn't realize that rows were so important, and I used this permaculture idea of keyholes. So I would have these main rows, and then I would have these little keyholes. I tried to make the garden layout kind of complex, but when you're first starting, just use rows. There's nothing wrong with it. You can have 30-inch rows and divide them into two, 15-inch each, have the crops, even just make them as short as 25 feet long by 15 inches. If you want to increase biodiversity, you can do that, but you don't need to go into some fancy design. Just use rows. So yeah, if you go check out my Instagram, a lot of those pictures are probably going to be for my second season, where I got things going a lot better. But my first season was just full of mistakes. These are things I wish I had learned. So if you're getting into market gardening, don't make the same mistakes I did. It's worth it to do a lot of research beforehand, but you don't want to do too much. The best way to learn is by actually doing it. So maybe go get involved in a local farm, start it yourself, but keep in mind these key things. Even if you are just jumping into it, you don't want to make these huge mistakes. So thanks for watching. Keep up with my farm on this YouTube channel. Like and subscribe. Leave a comment. It helps me out a lot. Just uploaded a video recently explaining ecological farming and the type of agriculture I do. So if you're interested in that and just getting into it, maybe this video you're like, what are you even talking about? What's market gardening? Go watch that. Yeah, thank you. Triple Nipple Nick. Bye.